There's something oddly revealing happening in Britain right now, not dramatic, not revolutionary, just quiet confusion. An elderly man stands outside a cash machine in Birmingham staring at a mobile phone screen that keeps asking for another code. A retired nurse in Kent sits on hold with her bank because the new app refuses to recognize her password. Somewhere else, a woman in her 70s walks into a branch she has used for 30 years only to discover it no longer exists. And I think what makes these moments feel so emotionally loaded is that they are not really about technology alone. They are about trust, about familiarity, about the slow disappearance of systems people once believed would remain stable for the rest of their lives. Because for decades, British banking carried this quiet sense of permanence. You opened an account at a local branch, you recognized the staff behind the counters, you signed forms with a pen, you memorized a simple PIN number. The relationship felt physical, predictable, human. Now, almost without warning, the relationship has become digital first. Face scans, verification texts, temporary security holds, app authentication, suspicious activity checks, automated fraud detection systems asking customers to prove their identity again and again. And honestly, many younger people probably hear this conversation and wonder what the problem is. Online banking has existed for years. Security updates are normal. Cybercrime is increasing. Fraudsters are becoming more sophisticated. Banks are under enormous pressure to protect customer information. All of that is true. But the thing people are starting to notice is that the emotional experience of modernization is not equal across generations. For someone in their 20s, another security layer often feels mildly inconvenient. For someone in their 70s, it can feel disorientating, sometimes even frightening. Because banking is not like adapting to a new streaming service or social media platform. It is not entertainment, it is not optional. It is the system through which pensions arrive, bills get paid, savings are protected, and independence is maintained. So when older customers suddenly struggle to access their own accounts, the emotional impact goes far beyond irritation. It touches dignity. And maybe that is the part institutions still underestimate. There is something deeply unsettling about feeling uncertain around your own money, especially for a generation raised during a period where financial responsibility was treated almost like a moral virtue. Many older Britons spent decades balancing household budgets carefully, avoiding debt, paying mortgages on time, building savings. Slowly, they were taught that caution and discipline created security. Now the systems surrounding that security seem to change every few months. Passwords need symbols, codes expire instantly, phones require updates, fraud alerts appear unexpectedly, branches disappear, telephone services become automated, human interaction becomes harder to reach, and it is strange because all of this is introduced in the language of convenience. Banks talk constantly about making services easier, faster, smoother, more secure. Yet there is this growing feeling among many older customers that banking has actually become emotionally harder, not necessarily harder for everyone, but harder for people who rely on routine and physical reassurance. I keep coming back to the closure of local branches because it feels symbolic somehow. Across Britain, banks have quietly withdrawn from town centres and high streets. Buildings that once represented stability now sit empty or converted into discount shops or apartment blocks, and with each closure, something larger disappears too, not just access, presence. For many older people, visiting the bank was not merely transactional, it was reassuring. Familiar faces mattered, small conversations mattered, the ability to ask a question without navigating a chatbot mattered. Now reassurance often arrives as an automated notification on a screen, and automated reassurance rarely feels reassuring. What is interesting is that banks themselves are not entirely wrong. Financial scams targeting elderly people have become increasingly sophisticated. Criminals impersonate family members, bank staff, delivery companies, even government departments. Fraud losses cost millions every year, and older customers are frequently targeted precisely because scammers assume they may be less comfortable with rapidly evolving technology. So from the perspective of financial institutions, stronger security systems are necessary, in some cases genuinely life-saving, and maybe that is what makes the whole situation so complicated. There is no obvious villain here, no single institution acting maliciously. Most of the changes are introduced with practical reasoning behind them. But practical reasoning does not automatically remove emotional consequences. The conversation seems to be shifting towards something wider now, not simply whether digital banking is efficient, but whether society still understands the psychological importance of stability. Because Britain increasingly feels organized around speed, faster checkouts, faster communication, faster identity verification, faster transactions, faster adaptation, Efficiency becomes the central value, but human beings do not all adapt at the same pace. Some people need repetition, familiarity, time to build confidence before systems change again. And honestly, there is a certain irony in watching a country obsessed with inclusion accidentally create new forms of exclusion through technology, not deliberate exclusion, but cultural exclusion nonetheless. You can almost feel the embarrassment many older people carry when discussing these issues publicly. They apologize for not understanding apps. They joke about being bad with technology. They laugh at themselves before anybody else can. But underneath the humor, there is often anxiety. Anxiety about becoming dependent. Anxiety about appearing left behind. Anxiety about living in a society that increasingly rewards digital fluency above every other kind of knowledge. And I think younger generations sometimes underestimate how emotionally exhausting constant adaptation can become over time. If you spent most of your adult life learning one set of systems only to watch them repeatedly disappear in old age, eventually the world itself starts feeling unstable. The rules never stop moving. That instability reaches beyond banking too. GP appointments move online, train tickets become digital, government forms require internet access, supermarkets introduce self-checkout systems. Everyday life becomes filled with interfaces demanding confidence, passwords, updates, and verification. Banking simply happens to be the place where these tensions feel most intimate because money represents survival, and perhaps this explains why the issue resonates politically as well as emotionally. Because beneath debates about fraud prevention and cybersecurity sits a larger national question. What obligations do institutions have towards citizens who built their lives around older ways of functioning? At what point does modernization stop feeling like progress and start feeling like abandonment? Different people answer that differently. Some argue adaptation is simply part of life. Technology changes, systems evolve. Younger taxpayers cannot preserve outdated infrastructure forever simply because change feels uncomfortable. Maintaining physical branches is expensive. Digital systems are cheaper and often more efficient. That argument carries weight. But there is another perspective emerging too. A feeling that Britain has become so focused on optimization that it sometimes forgets the emotional architecture holding society together, because convenience for institutions does not always translate into confidence for individuals, and confidence matters enormously. A person who feels secure navigating society participates more fully in it. They travel, spend money, engage socially, ask questions, make decisions independently. Once confidence erodes, withdrawal often follows quietly behind it. That is what makes these banking stories feel strangely haunting. They are not only stories about passwords and verification codes, they are stories about people slowly losing certainty in systems they once trusted instinctively. You can almost sense the grief hidden inside that transition, not dramatic grief, softer than that, the grief of watching familiar structures disappear one by one while being told the replacements are objectively better. And maybe they are better in measurable ways. Fraud prevention statistics may improve, transactions may become quicker, costs may fall, but human beings experience progress emotionally, not statistically. That distinction matters more than policymakers sometimes realize. And honestly, I suspect this conversation will only grow louder over the next decade because Britain is aging. Millions more people will move into later life while technology continues accelerating around them. Artificial intelligence, biometric systems, cashless payments, digital identity verification, remote customer services. The pace will not slow down. If anything, it may become even harder to keep up, which means the real challenge may not be technological at all. It may be cultural. Can a society modernize without making large groups of people feel emotionally obsolete? Can institutions pursue efficiency without stripping away the human reassurance many citizens still rely upon? Can progress remain humane? I keep coming back to that word, humane, because beneath every discussion about apps and passwords sits something deeply human, the fear of losing control over ordinary life, and perhaps that is why these stories linger in the public imagination longer than expected. People recognize themselves in them, not necessarily as they are now, but as they may eventually become. One day, almost everyone will experience the unsettling moment of realizing the world has quietly reorganized itself around people younger, faster, and more fluent than them. And when that moment arrives, reassurance may matter just as much as security, maybe more. And perhaps the saddest part is how invisible these experiences can become. An older person struggling with a banking app rarely creates headlines. There are no dramatic images, no public protests, just thousands of small private moments happening quietly behind front doors across the country. Someone writing passwords on scraps of paper because memory feels less reliable than it once did. someone avoiding online banking altogether out of fear they might make a mistake they cannot undo, someone pretending they understand a process because admitting confusion feels humiliating. And I think that quietness matters. Society tends to notice disruption when people become loud, but many older Britons were raised not to complain too much, not to inconvenience others, not to demand attention. So the frustration often stays internal. It settles into a kind of resignation, a feeling that perhaps the modern world simply belongs more naturally to somebody else now, and that is a deeply lonely feeling for any society to produce among people who once felt fully at home inside it. Maybe that is the real warning hidden underneath this story. Progress feels far less impressive when people quietly stop feeling included at all.